He was a man who lived in a fortress of glass and steel, his world a masterpiece of cold, perfect control. But on a night that smelled of rain and desperation, she fainted at his feet and became the one beautiful, chaotic flaw in his life he could never erase. This is the story of the moment a storm brought two worlds together, of the silent war waged with a basil plant and charcoal dust, of the public confession that shattered an empire of silence, and the kiss, the one that had been held back for far, far too long. Perhaps you know the feeling, when you meet someone and the very air in the room changes, a quiet shift in gravity, a pull your mind can't explain, but your soul understands completely. It's a connection that feels both dangerous and like coming home. Have you ever felt that pull you couldn't explain? That chemistry logic can't define? If stories of impossible connections and love that breaks down the highest walls move you, subscribe. A new cinematic romance is waiting for you every night. Our story begins on one of those nights in the city when the sky itself seems to be at war. It began with a storm, a collapse, and a rescue that was never meant to be an act of kindness. He didn't know it then, standing over the fragile, rain-soaked artist at his feet, but he wasn't saving her. He was about to be saved himself. This is the story of Elijah and Harper, a story that asks if a man who controls everything can surrender to the one thing he can't, the human heart. It's a battle between a life of calculated safety and a love that threatens to burn everything to the ground just to build something real from the ashes. As their story unfolds, you will see how the smallest acts of defiance can break down the highest walls. And by the end, you will understand why the most powerful love stories aren't about finding a perfect person, but about having the courage to embrace their beautiful imperfections. The city was a symphony of chaos, not a gentle rain, but a brutal, relentless onslaught that turned sidewalks into slick, dangerous mirrors. For Harper Miller, the sound was just a distant, angry roar, muffled by the relentless thrumming in her own ears. Her world was a dizzying kaleidoscope of grey and black, anchored only by the threadbare strap of her art satchel digging into her shoulder. Harper wasn't supposed to be out in this. She was supposed to be in her warm, brightly lit community art studio, helping Mr. Henderson's class finish their clay self-portraits. But the studio's ancient heating system had sputtered its last breath, and Harper, with her fiercely independent spirit, had spent the last 8 hours hauling heavy, cold-soaked supplies back to her small third-floor walk-up apartment. She was running on fumes, a diet of instant coffee and the fierce burning passion she held for her students, the forgotten kids from the less seen parts of the city, whose talent often went unrecognized. Her small savings had gone into keeping the studio afloat, into paint and canvases, leaving nothing for herself. The final strain hit her as she rounded the corner onto Fifth Avenue. A violent gust of wind tore her old umbrella inside out, a canvas of tattered silk and broken wire. The chilling rain instantly plastered her thin cotton dress to her skin. Her knees buckled once, twice. She tried to steady herself against a sleek black marble wall, the facade of one of the city's most exclusive and imposing skyscrapers, a glass and steel monument to untouchable wealth. The fatigue, the cold, the sheer physical and emotional exhaustion of fighting a battle she couldn't win, it all converged in a sudden, sickening wave. The world tilted violently. The roaring of the storm faded to a muffled drone. Harper felt the ground rush up to meet her, a cold, hard promise of rest. The last thing she registered was the blur of polished, expensive leather shoes stepping into her peripheral vision, and the sound of a deep, resonant voice, a sound that felt like it belonged in a world far removed from her own chaos, calling out, sharp and commanding. And then, nothing. Elijah Brown was a man who lived a life of absolute control, the reclusive CEO of Horizon Tech, a man who built an empire on algorithms and digital walls. He rarely ventured out, and never without purpose. His private elevator opened directly into his office in the monolithic tower, a world designed to insulate him from the chaos of the street. But on this night, a rare miscommunication with his driver had forced him to take the ground floor exit, and for a fleeting, chaotic moment he was exposed to the real world. He saw her fall, not a stumble, but a complete dramatic surrender to the elements, a tiny, drenched figure in a desperate struggle against his tower's gleaming marble facade. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to stay isolated, to call security, to delegate, but the sight of her, so utterly defeated, a splash of raw, vulnerable color against the sterile backdrop of his empire bypassed his logic. He moved, a swift, decisive blur of motion. In his hands he was already holding a heavy, tailored cashmere coat he'd been about to hand to his assistant. He scooped her slight body into his arms with surprising strength, the rain-soaked weight barely registering. She was deathly cold, her skin clammy against the fine wool of his suit. His eyes, dark and sharp like polished obsidian, assessed the situation in a single, analytical sweep. He knew every emergency room in the city, every five-star hotel, but his immediate visceral response was to bring this delicate, broken thing back to the only place he trusted, his sky-high fortress. To the Penthouse. Now, he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly note of authority to his security chief, who was already running to meet him. The ascent in the private elevator was silent, a hushed rush to the heavens. Harper was limp in his arms, her dark hair a tangled mess, her lips faintly blue. Elijah laid her gently on the vast leather sofa that dominated his sleek, minimalist office on the top floor. The space was a kingdom of muted grey, polished steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the raging, illuminated storm. It was a study in controlled power, a sanctuary built for one, where emotion had no place. He looked down at the woman on his sofa. She was entirely out of place, a splash of vibrant, chaotic life, even in her current state, in a room that demanded order. He was a man who dealt with billions, with cold, hard facts, with the digital infrastructure of the world. Yet here he was, staring at a damp, unconscious stranger, his heart beating a rhythm that was entirely outside his control. He was meticulous. He removed her soaking satchel, placing it on the floor. He retrieved a ridiculously soft, oversized blanket, a gift from a client he'd never used, and draped it over her. He rang the apartment manager, barking curt, precise instructions for a doctor to be dispatched immediately, and for hot tea, not coffee, to be prepared. When Harper's eyes fluttered open, she wasn't met with the familiar chipped paint of her ceiling, but with the vast, disorienting expanse of a ceiling so high it felt like the sky. Her body ached, but the cold was gone, replaced by a suffocating warmth. She was cocooned in a blanket that felt like spun air. She focused, and the room snapped into terrifying reality. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city in a breathtaking, godlike view. The decor was masculine and elegant, dominated by shades of slate, cream, and chrome. It wasn't merely wealth, it was power made manifest. Then she saw him. He was standing several feet away, by a large, minimalist desk, a tall, imposing silhouette, in a dark, tailored suit that looked impossibly dry and pristine. He was speaking into a headset, his back to her, his voice a low, clipped murmur of commands. He had the profile of a Roman statue, sharp, strong, utterly unyielding. He radiated an aura of severe, quiet authority that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She tried to sit up, a painful rush of dizziness instantly halting her. The movement must have caught his attention because he instantly turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice no longer a murmur, but a sharp, resonant baritone that sliced through the air. He strode toward her, his movements economical and precise. He carried a small glass of water and a pill. He didn't offer a greeting or a gentle inquiry. He offered a solution. "You fainted due to exhaustion and hypothermia," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, purely clinical. "The doctor will be here in 20 minutes. Drink this, it's a low-dose sedative to prevent a recurrence." Harper blinked at him, completely overwhelmed. This man wasn't a good Samaritan. He was an imposing, almost terrifying force of nature in his own right. Who are you?" she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. He paused, holding the glass, his expression utterly unreadable. He looked at her as if she were a complicated equation he had yet to solve. "My name is Elijah Brown," he said. He didn't offer a job title or a background, just the name, a name that felt heavy with untold meaning. "You are in my residence. You collapsed outside the main entrance. I brought you here." He waited for her to take the pill and the water. His patience was an active, heavy thing. Harper, a woman who prided herself on her independence, felt a sudden, fierce rush of humiliation. I'm fine," she insisted, trying to hand back the glass. "I need to go. My apartment isn't far." Elijah's mouth, a thin, controlled line, barely twitched. "No, you won't. You're exhibiting signs of severe fatigue and shock. You are staying here until the doctor clears you." His tone was not up for negotiation. It was a final, logical declaration. Harper knew instinctively that arguing would be a futile exercise. This man was clearly accustomed to absolute authority. She took the pill and the water, the small gesture of compliance softening the tension around his shoulders infinitesimally. "Thank you," she mumbled, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "I truly appreciate your charity." "It's not charity," Elijah instantly countered, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if the word offended his sense of efficiency. "It's a mitigation of liability. If you had sustained a serious injury on my property, it would have been an administrative complication." His blunt, cold pragmatism extinguished the last flicker of warmth she felt toward him. He saw her as an item on a balance sheet, a potential problem to be managed. The doctor arrived quickly, a quiet, middle-aged woman in impeccable scrubs, and performed a thorough, discreet examination. She confirmed Elijah's diagnosis and prescribed rest, hydration, and a course of supplements. She reiterated the command, no leaving for 48 hours. As the doctor departed, leaving a faint scent of antiseptic in her wake, Elijah gestured toward a doorway that led off the main living area. "The guest suite is through there," he said. "It has its own bathroom. There are clean clothes in the wardrobe. I will instruct the staff to prepare food, but you are not to leave the suite for any reason until tomorrow morning. I have work." He was dismissing her. After saving her life, he was treating her like a necessary temporary inconvenience. Harper's stubborn independence flared. "I need my bag," she insisted. "My phone, my keys. Everything I own is in that satchel." He picked up the sodden art satchel from the floor, holding it between two fingers, as if it might contaminate him. He opened it and pulled out a small worn flip phone, a bundle of keys and a few small, slightly water-damaged sketches of children's faces. He looked at the sketches, his sharp eyes lingering for a second too long. It was the first indication of a world outside of his own that seemed to pierce his cool exterior. "Your things will be dried and returned to you," he stated, his control reasserting itself. He placed the satchel on his desk. "Go rest, Harper Miller." The use of her full name, the one he must have gotten from her ID, felt like a cold, formal announcement. Harper was left with no choice. She was exhausted, weak, and trapped in a luxurious prison built of steel and glass. She walked through the indicated doorway and found herself in a suite that was larger than her entire apartment. A massive bed with high thread count sheets, a cavernous marble bathroom, and a wardrobe already stocked with simple, neutral-colored silk sleepwear. Alone, Harper sank onto the edge of the bed. The shock and cold began to recede, replaced by a deep, gnawing sense of dislocation. Who was this man, Elijah Brown? He had the bearing of a king, the control of a military general, and the emotional distance of an iceberg. She had been plucked from a disaster and placed into a situation that felt just as terrifying. She went to the window. The lights of the city twinkled below, a vibrant, living thing. From this height, the storm looked tame, a distant spectacle. She felt the heavy silence of the penthouse pressing down on her. It wasn't the noise of the city he had walled out. It was life itself. The apartment was immaculate, sterile, beautiful, and utterly devoid of any sign of personal life. No photos, no books, no small trinkets. She was a creature of color, chaos, and connection. She painted with her hands, loved the smell of turpentine and cheap glue, and thrived on the noise of children's laughter. He was a being of logic, silence, and order. She slipped into the silk pajamas, cool and alien against her skin, and felt the full weight of her dependence. He had been so quick to deny it was charity, but what else was it? A transaction for the avoidance of a lawsuit. The next morning, the city was washed clean and bathed in a pale, quiet light. Harper felt marginally better, the exhaustion less crippling. She dressed in the borrowed clothes, a simple grey cashmere set that felt like air, and warily ventured out of the suite. She found Elijah where she expected him, standing by the wall of windows in the main living area, already in a crisp, dark suit, a ceramic mug in his hand. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at the digital display on a holographic table. He looked like what he was, a man who had been at work for hours. He looked up as she approached, his eyes registering her presence with a simple, analytical nod. "Good morning," he said. His voice was steady, calm. "There is coffee and breakfast on the counter. The service retrieved your art supplies. They are in the kitchen being professionally dried and assessed for damage. Thank you, Mr. Brown, Harper said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. But I really must leave. I have classes today. My students— Your students will wait, Elijah interrupted, his gaze returning to the floating digital data. I took the liberty of contacting the building manager for your studio. The structural inspection due to the storm damage has been moved up. The building is closed. Harper felt a sudden, sharp panic. Closed? For how long? I can't— It is a necessary precaution, he cut in, with the brutal efficiency of a surgeon. The structural integrity may be compromised. It will be at least a week before the inspection is complete, possibly more. He turned to face her, finally giving her his full, intense attention. He leaned back against the counter, a silent, imposing wall of authority. Your situation has changed, Harper, he stated. You have no place to work, and your physical state requires continued rest. You can stay here for the duration of the inspection. It is logically the most expedient solution. You will not impede my routine, and you will have the space and resources to recover fully. His offer was immensely generous, yet it felt colder than the rain. She was a logically expedient solution. Harper's pride fought a desperate battle. I can't accept that. I can't be dependent on you. You are not dependent on me, he corrected, his voice tinged with the slightest hint of impatience. You are utilizing a spare resource. This apartment is 15,000 square feet. Your presence in the guest suite is a statistically irrelevant factor in my life. Consider it an occupational hazard. The backhanded practicality of the offer, the way he reduced her entire existence to a statistically irrelevant factor, was oddly disarming. It removed the obligation. It made it about his logic, not his pity. She looked at him, truly trying to see past the polished, unyielding facade. Was he just a machine of efficiency, or was there a flicker of humanity there? His eyes were dark and guarded, revealing nothing. And what do I do here? She challenged, her voice low. I don't belong in a place like this. I need to be doing something. I need my work. Elijah considered her, his chin tilted, an analytical assessment. Then, do your work. You have access to high-speed internet. I will have the studio manager bring you a table and a comfortable chair. You can prepare lessons, you can plan, just ensure you are quiet. He was giving her a space to exist, a license to work, a concession. With a heavy sigh, Harper knew she was beaten. The city was a mess, her studio was closed, and she was physically drained. To accept his expedient solution was the only rational path back to her independence. All right, Mr. Brown, she conceded. I will stay, but I will not be silent, and I will not be invisible. A faint, almost imperceptible muscle twitched in Elijah's jaw. It was the closest thing to a reaction she had ever seen. Good, he said, pushing off the counter. I will be in my office. Do not disturb me before 8 p.m., and please refrain from bringing any paint into the main living area. I value the aesthetic consistency. He turned and walked away, his departure a statement of finality. Harper watched him go, a small, defiant smile touching her lips. Paint. He was terrified of paint. She, Harper Miller, whose world was built on the beautiful, messy chaos of color, had found her first point of resistance. The immense silence of the penthouse suddenly felt less intimidating and more like a challenge. She was going to fill his clean, cold, perfect world with life. The first few days were an awkward, silent ballet of avoidance. Harper settled into the guest suite, working tirelessly on her laptop, organizing her online resources, feeling the sterile silence press down on her. Elijah was a creature of absolute routine, leaving early and returning late, his footsteps on the marble floor the only sign of his presence. She made herself a promise. She would not be his charity case. She would not be statistically irrelevant. She began to leave small traces of herself behind. She used the expensive, sleek kitchen to make her simple meals, the aroma of garlic and basil a subtle act of rebellion against the scentless air. She placed a small, vibrant orange from her breakfast bowl on the polished granite counter, a deliberate violation of his aesthetic consistency. She realized that the man who controlled billions of dollars was utterly terrified of human mess, of the unplanned, of the feeling of things, and she was going to teach him to feel. Harper kept her promise. She did not bring paint into the main living area, but she found other ways to make her presence known. Her temporary workspace, a beautiful teak writing desk Elijah's staff had swiftly procured, was situated by the great window, a strategic position. She spread her work out. Lesson plans scrawled on brightly colored post-it notes, sketches of new designs for the community mural, and a small potted basil plant she insisted on buying to purify the air. The basil plant was her proudest offense, a living, growing, fragrant violation of the penthouse's sterile, scentless equilibrium. Elijah noticed everything. He wasn't a man who looked. He was a man who scanned. He would enter the room in the morning, his gaze sweeping the space in a fraction of a second, his expression remaining impassive. But Harper could feel the micro-twitch in his jaw whenever his eyes landed on the bright yellow post-its or the slightly crooked basil plant. Their conversations remained a barren landscape of politeness. Did you sleep well? The climate control is functional. The inspection will be delayed by 2 days. He treated her comfort as another operational metric he was obligated to maintain. One evening, Harper was sketching on a large notepad, trying to translate a feeling of frantic, trapped energy into lines and shading. She was completely lost in her work, the charcoal a satisfying, messy extension of her hand. Elijah came home earlier than usual. He stopped at the entrance of the living area, his presence a sudden, heavy anchor in the space. He didn't speak, but she felt his gaze on her, not on her, but on the charcoal dust smudging the cream cashmere blanket she was using to keep her legs warm. Harper looked up, her expression defiant. "I'm using the pencil side," she said. Elijah slowly walked toward his liquor cabinet, retrieving a bottle of single malt whiskey. He poured 2 fingers into a heavy glass, his movements deliberate. He didn't sit down. "That sketch," he said, his voice low. "It's chaotic." "Art is chaos given form," Harper countered, turning the notepad to face him. "What you see as messy lines is tension, struggle. It's what happens when the feeling won't fit the frame." He took a slow sip of the whiskey, his dark eyes fixed on the drawing. "My world is about controlling the frame, predictability. If the system is chaotic, it is fundamentally flawed. In my business, that flaw costs billions." "And in my business," Harper murmured, tapping the charcoal pencil against the paper, "that flaw makes a human being. We embrace the flaws. We draw them." He looked up from the drawing to her face. For the first time, his gaze held not just analysis, but an intense, focused curiosity. He saw the fire in her eyes, the fierce belief in the disorder she cherished. "Why children's art?" he asked, the shift in topic surprising her. "You have talent. Why not galleries, commissions? Why a community studio?" Harper shrugged, her pride tightening her shoulders. "Because art is a language, and the children in my community have stories that need a voice. They don't have the luxury of contemplating abstract flawlessness. They live in chaos. I teach them how to draw their way out of it. It's important work, Mr. Brown." "Elijah," he corrected, his voice so quiet it was barely audible. "We've bypassed the formality of titles." It was a small, monumental concession. She was no longer a liability. She was Harper. A new, delicate truce formed between them. They were 2 satellites in a shared orbit, occasionally crossing paths. Harper was learning his routine. He worked constantly, often late into the night. She noticed the slight tremor in his hand when he held his coffee on the mornings after his longest nights. She noticed that he ate his meticulously portioned, catered meals alone, always at his desk, staring at screens full of indecipherable data. He wasn't just working. He was isolated. The true nature of his reclusiveness, a profound loneliness, began to dawn on her. One very late night, a week into her stay, Harper couldn't sleep. The oppressive silence of the penthouse had become a physical thing. She slipped out of her suite and found Elijah not in his office but in the main living area, standing by the holographic display table. He was leaning on his hands, his head bowed, his posture one of immense, debilitating exhaustion. His suit jacket was off and his crisp white shirt was slightly rumpled. He looked less like a tech titan and more like a man whose internal battery had just hit 0. He was muttering to himself, a string of cold, high-level financial terms mixed with raw, frustrated curses. Harper hesitated. Every alarm bell in her mind told her to retreat, to honor his strict boundaries. But the sight of his vulnerability was a powerful magnet. She walked quietly to the kitchen. She didn't turn on a light, moving only by the ambient glow of the city outside. She found the ingredients she had purchased and began to boil water. "Are you attempting to make noise?" Elijah's voice cut through the silence, sharp and immediately controlled. He had snapped back into his armor. "No, Elijah," she replied. not looking at him. "I'm attempting to make something that works better than whiskey. It's a ginger and lavender infusion. It settles the nervous system. It's not a flaw, it's a remedy." She waited, her back to him, expecting the immediate dismissal, but the silence stretched. Finally, he said, "I have a migraine. 2 hours of data projection has compromised my visual field." It was the first time he had ever volunteered a personal weakness, a crack in the fortress. Harper brought the steaming mug to his desk. She placed a second mug, hers, on the opposite side of the table, sitting down uninvited. The distance between them was still vast, but the shared silence was less heavy, infused now with the quiet steam of the tea. "You're a creature of immense order," Harper said softly, holding the warm mug to her cheek. "But the world outside your windows isn't. You need to let go sometimes. You can't control everything." Elijah lifted the mug, his eyes closed for a moment as he inhaled the spicy, soothing aroma. "Control is the illusion of safety, Harper. It is all I have. The only thing I have ever had. In my world, lack of control is catastrophic." He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw the sheer weight of his responsibilities in the tired lines around his eyes. "Tell me about your world," he commanded, a simple, unexpected invitation. "Tell me something chaotic and non-catastrophic." So, hesitantly at first and then with a rush of comforting warmth, she told him about her students. She told him about 5-year-old Miguel, who could only draw in angry black lines, but had recently added a tentative splash of yellow sun. She told him about the thrill of finding beauty in broken, salvaged materials. She spoke of her passion, the messy, unquantifiable joy of human connection. He listened with an unnerving, perfect stillness. He didn't offer advice or solutions. He simply absorbed her words, a man starved of human spontaneity. As she spoke, the tension slowly drained from his face. She was giving him a momentary reprieve from the relentless perfection of his existence. From that night on, their encounters deepened. The shared tea became a quiet ritual. Harper would wait up, often sketching or reading, and he would join her, sometimes speaking, often just existing in the same space, letting the comforting scent of basil and the low light of the city filter into his solitude. One afternoon, Elijah was unexpectedly late returning from a trip to the gym. Harper was sitting on the sofa, waiting for the sound of his elevator, when she noticed a piece of tech she hadn't seen before. Tucked away on a small recessed shelf was an intricate, beautiful but slightly dusty telescope. It was clearly expensive, the type used for serious astronomy, but it was set up in a corner, unused. When he finally arrived, he looked particularly strained, but quickly masked it. "You look tired," Harper observed, skipping the formalities. "It was an inefficient afternoon," he replied, taking off his jacket. "You own a telescope," she stated, pointing to the corner. "You never use it." Elijah followed her gaze. A flicker of something, shame perhaps or regret, crossed his features. "It was a phase," he dismissed, moving to place his jacket away. "A mathematical exercise in mapping the predictable movements of celestial bodies. It proved to be a waste of time." "It's the ultimate control," Harper mused, walking over to it. "Mapping the stars, finding order in the black, chaotic infinite." She gently dusted the lens with the edge of her soft sweater. "But you can't control them, Elijah. They're too far away, they simply are." He was standing close now, too close for their polite truce. "There is no comfort in a lack of control, Harper. Only anxiety. And no life in constant control. Only numbness," she countered, her voice low. She looked up at him. "Why are you so reclusive? You own a company that changes the world, yet you live like a prisoner in the sky. Why is the outside world so terrifying?" The question hung in the air, heavy and intrusive. Elijah's face shut down instantly, the steel mask snapping back into place. "That is an inquiry beyond your jurisdiction, Harper," he said, his voice cold and final, laced with a harsh warning. "There are walls for a reason. Do not attempt to climb them." He turned and retreated to his office, the door closing with a soft, definitive click that felt like a slamming door in her face. The silence he left behind was heavy with unspoken secrets. Harper was hurt, but she was also an artist. She understood boundaries, but she also understood that art was meant to provoke, to find the truth behind the mask. His severity only confirmed her suspicion. His isolation wasn't a choice of preference. It was a consequence of a deep, unaddressed wound. She spent the entire next day on a piece of art that was solely for him. She retrieved the dry charcoal from her satchel, and used the back of one of his massive, untouched white canvases she had found in a storage closet, another clue to a hidden, suppressed aesthetic life. She didn't draw a scene. She drew his eyes. His dark, sharp, analytical eyes, but she drew them with a profound, almost painful depth of loneliness, a vulnerability he would never show the world. And in the corner of the sketch, she drew a tiny, delicate crack in the iris, a hairline fracture. When Elijah came home, she was gone, having retreated to her suite, leaving the canvas propped up against the wall in the center of the living room, facing his desk. He walked in, and his sweep of the room stopped dead. He saw the canvas, the one he had forgotten he owned, now bearing a stark black and white image. He walked toward it slowly, his briefcase falling with a muted thud onto the marble floor. He didn't pick it up. He simply stared at the image. The lines of charcoal were raw, powerful, and devastatingly accurate. It wasn't just a portrait. It was a psychological X-ray. She hadn't just captured his gaze. She had captured the pain beneath the control. He ran a thumb over the charcoal, right over the tiny, deliberate crack she had drawn near the edge of the pupil. A flaw, he muttered to himself, his voice thick with emotion. He finally looked away, his eyes finding the closed door of the guest suite. He knew she was in there, waiting for his reaction. She hadn't left a note. The art was the note. It was a confession, an accusation, and an invitation to honesty. Elijah spent the next hour in a rare state of mental chaos. The sketch had completely derailed him. Harper had bypassed his logical defenses, ignored his wealth, and penetrated the one thing he protected most fiercely, the control over his inner world. He paced the penthouse, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of his own heart. He was furious at the invasion, but terrifyingly, he was moved by the understanding. No one had ever seen him so clearly. People saw the power, the money, the title. Harper, the woman he had saved out of liability mitigation, had seen the man, the prisoner of his own success. He looked at the canvas again. He was still angry, but the anger was cold, quickly turning into a defense mechanism. He would not be dissected. He walked to her door, stopping short of knocking. He couldn't speak, not yet. The words were failing him. He was losing control. He walked away from her door and straight to his office. He didn't call her. He didn't confront her. He did what he always did when faced with an emotional crisis. He returned to the world he could control. He immersed himself in the cold, logical light of his screens, trying to use billions of lines of code to wipe out one single powerful line of charcoal. The silence the next morning was palpable, but different. It wasn't the old chill of avoidance, but the heavy, charged tension of a bomb about to detonate. Harper emerged from her suite, braced for the confrontation. The canvas was no longer in the center of the room. The void it left was a statement in itself. She found Elijah on the terrace, an expanse of marble and glass that served as a minimalist garden, complete with a single perfectly trimmed bonsai tree. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, urgent tone, words like acquisition, hostile takeover, and valuation punctuating his speech. He was in an impeccable suit and under the morning light looked taller, more untouchable. The contrast with the vulnerable man from the night before was jarring. He ended the call and turned. The look in his eyes was cold, a chilling distance she recognized as a shield built from fear. "I saw the drawing," he said, without preamble. "It's a violation. You exceeded the terms of our agreement, Harper. You are not a therapist. You are a guest." Harper's voice was calm, her emotion contained but firm. "I am an artist, Elijah, and art is not a violation. It is the truth. And the truth is that you are drowning in your own control. The line you draw around yourself doesn't prevent me from seeing the crack that is in you." He took a step toward her, his sudden proximity charged with a dangerous energy. "You know nothing about me," he hissed, his voice low and grave. "You saw an emotional caricature of a tired man. I am responsible for 10,000 employees, for trillions in assets. The crack you drew is the discipline that allows me to survive and sustain this empire. Don't you dare romanticize my isolation." "I am not romanticizing it, I am responding to it," she countered, standing her ground. "You rescued me from my chaos, but I didn't ask to be placed in your vacuum. You want me to be a statistically irrelevant factor, but that factor has eyes, and what I see terrifies you." The air between them crackled. The attraction, which had until then been disguised as intellectual tension, exploded into an undeniable intensity. They were closer than they had ever been. the physical distance almost zero, but the emotional chasm between them was screaming. Elijah leaned forward, his hand hovering over the back of her neck for a split second before he restrained himself, his control winning by a millisecond. "You need to leave," he said, but the urgency in his voice was not one of repulsion, but of panic. "Today. I can't." "Can't what, Elijah?" she whispered, daring him to break. He stepped back abruptly, as if her closeness were a physical burn. "You will go home today. The studio inspection will be expedited. You will provide my assistant with your address, and I will arrange the logistics." It was an order of dismissal, an abrupt end to their forced proximity. Harper's anger dissolved into a sharp, bitter pain. "You're kicking me out because I don't fit into your neat, orderly files." "I'm protecting you," he said, his voice tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "From me, and from this world." The rest of the day was a purgatory. Harper packed her few belongings, the taste of defeat bitter in her mouth. She wasn't an irrelevant variable, but she was, in the end, disposable. As night fell, Elijah met her in the foyer near the private elevator. He was no longer in a suit, but wearing a dark cashmere shirt and casual trousers, an outfit that made him look like a man, not a CEO. He held her dried and repaired art satchel. "Your apartment is cleared for your return," he announced, his voice flat, formal. He approached and handed her the bag. Their fingers brushed. The contact was a shock, an electric discharge that rippled through them both. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. "What is going to happen to you, Elijah?" Harper asked, her voice choked with unshed tears. He sighed, a deep sound of weariness that echoed in the silent marble hall. "I will return to my life of control, where people don't faint on my sidewalk and don't draw the hidden fractures in my soul." It was an anomalous period. "You're wrong," Harper replied, courage returning with the pain of her departure. "It was the first real thing that has happened to you in years, and you are sending it away out of fear." She turned, ready to step into the elevator and out of his life forever. "Harper, wait." She stopped, her back to him, but did not turn around. Elijah took a hesitant step forward, his voice now a hoarse confession. "I won't let you go back to that struggle. The rent for your apartment is paid for the next 6 months, and I've acquired the building that houses your studio. The structural inspection will take as long as necessary. Your studio's rent will be covered for a year in advance. In exchange—" Harper's heart hammered against her ribs. "In exchange for what, Elijah?" He took too long to answer, the tension stretching into an unbearable silence. "In exchange for you not hating me," he finally said, "and in exchange for you telling me if you ever faint on my sidewalk again. I cannot have that variable in the world without being aware of it." It was the most pragmatic and most devastating declaration of love she had ever heard. He was buying her safety, her gratitude, and a line of communication. He was buying the only piece of control he could have over the one thing he couldn't control, her. "I don't hate you, Elijah," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I hate your fear." She stepped into the elevator. He did not follow. The doors slid shut, sealing him in his silent, gilded cage. The kiss that had simmered between them for weeks never came. Their connection, born under an act of transactional charity, ended with a forced, heartbreaking goodbye. Harper returned to her life, but it was irrevocably altered. Her small apartment seemed smaller, her rescued studio safer, but both lacked the cold, electrifying tension that the penthouse possessed. She threw herself into her work, the familiar smell of paint and the bright laughter of the children becoming her only antidote to Elijah's sterile, silent world. Weeks passed at a cruel, slow pace. She received anonymous bank confirmations for the paid rents, a cold, constant reminder of her debt to him. She saw him occasionally on the news, a still shot of his face at a tech conference, always serious, always in a perfectly tailored suit. He was the Silicon tyrant, a man who commanded the future from a fortress in the sky. Elijah, meanwhile, was disintegrating. The penthouse was more silent than ever. He had removed her sketch from view, but he had not thrown it away. He kept it in a folder of his most confidential documents, unable to look at it, unable to part with it. He couldn't sleep. He would look at the perfectly trimmed bonsai and see the simple vase she had placed on his coffee table to hold her pencils. He would smell the ghost of garlic and basil in his scentless kitchen. He realized he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had traded the risk of being vulnerable for the guaranteed torment of solitude. He had tried to control the variable of loving her, and the price was his sanity. Elijah's world was in perfect order, and he was completely, utterly broken. About a month after she left, Harper received an invitation in the mail. It was not from him. It was a thick, cream-colored card from the City Arts Council for a benefit gala in support of community art programs. It was a golden opportunity to secure funding for her studio, to finally stand on her own 2 feet, without his invisible safety net. On the day of the event, she put on the only decent cocktail dress she owned, a simple, elegant dark blue that brought out the fire in her eyes. She went alone, anxious and hopeful. The ballroom was the very personification of Elijah's world. Crystal chandeliers dripping light, the hushed murmurs of the city's elite, and an obscene amount of wealth on display. Harper was standing in a corner, nursing a glass of sparkling water, feeling like a modern-day Cinderella without the glass slipper, when a sudden chill ran down her spine. A familiar, powerful presence had entered the room. She looked up, and there he was, Elijah Brown. He was the guest of honor, the silent host of power whose foundation was the gala's primary sponsor. He stood in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, surrounded by executives and politicians who looked at him with a mixture of reverence and fear. He was an imposing figure of authority, the man who had sent money to pay her rent but couldn't bear to look her in the eye. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. It was a shock that paralyzed them both. For a moment, the party atmosphere vanished. The noise, the music, the people, it all faded into a blur. It was just the two of them, the tension between them visible like a stretched, vibrating cord. Harper felt the old attraction, that powerful spark, now mixed with a cold, righteous anger. He had hidden her away, paid for her to be a silent, distant problem he had solved. And now she was here in his world, uninvited and unmanaged. She did what an artist does. She used the tension. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and began to walk, not toward him, but toward the stage at the front of the room, where the evening speakers were being introduced. She would no longer be his statistically irrelevant variable. She was Harper Miller, and she had a voice. Elijah watched her immobile, a statue carved from onyx. His eyes, which could collapse companies with a single dismissive glance, were fixed on her with a chaotic mixture of panic, adoration, and the silent rage of a man who had just lost all control. When Harper reached the stage, the master of ceremonies smiled, announcing, "And now we are honored to present our next speaker, the inspiration behind our new Urban Arts Fund, the talented and determined Ms. Harper Miller." The audience applauded politely. Harper stepped up to the microphone, but her eyes were fixed on Elijah. He was the king on his throne, and she was about to challenge his reign in front of his entire court. "My studio," Harper began, her voice strong and resonant, carrying through the vast, silent room, was a place of safety for children who needed an escape, until it was attacked by a force of nature, by a storm. But as I've learned, it is not the chaos of nature that truly threatens to destroy us. It is our own internal chaos. She paused, looking directly at him. Elijah's fists were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. "I was rescued by a man of immense power, a man of perfect order. He gave me a place to stay, a cocoon of luxury and silence. But this man of such complete control taught me the most painful lesson of all, that the greatest enemy of life is not disorder. It is the fear of connection. It is the fear of being truly seen, of having the cracks in your perfect facade exposed for all the world to see." The ballroom was dead silent. Every eye in the room swiveled from her to the city's most famous recluse, Elijah Brown. "I returned to my own beautiful chaos," Harper concluded, a sad, knowing smile on her lips, "because I prefer the struggle of a messy, disordered reality over the slow death of a perfectly controlled life. And so I thank that man for showing me exactly what I never want to become." Harper's speech ended. For a heart-stopping second there was only silence. Then the room erupted in a tidal wave of applause. The spotlight was no longer on her. It was on him, his reclusion, his reputation, his carefully guarded secret. Everything was exposed. His control was finally, irrevocably broken. The applause died down, replaced by a nervous electric hum that filled the grand ballroom. Harper stepped off the stage, her heart hammering against her ribs, a drumbeat of defiance and fear. Her eyes never left Elijah. He was still standing in the exact same spot, but the mask of cool composure he always wore had finally completely shattered. The detached indifference was gone, replaced by a look of raw devastation. He was cornered, exposed, and vulnerable for the entire world to see. The business associates and city elites who had been surrounding him like moths to a flame began to melt away, sensing a private storm they wanted no part of. Soon, he was standing alone, a towering, isolated monument to his own shattered control. His dark eyes, which had always held a detached, analytical clarity, were clouded with a storm of emotion she couldn't decipher. Harper knew she had won the battle, but she feared she had lost the war. She had forced him to be honest with himself, but in doing so she may have destroyed any fragile future they might have had. She turned away, needing to escape the suffocating air of the ballroom, and headed for the quiet anonymity of the lobby. She didn't get far. A hand, strong and surprisingly gentle, wrapped around her arm. "Harper, don't." It wasn't a command this time, but a plea, his voice rough with an urgency that bypassed his usual controlled baritone. She stopped, but didn't turn to face him. "I don't belong here, Elijah. You made that clear when you bought my silence with a year's rent. I just needed to be honest about the cost of that transaction." He stepped in front of her, blocking her path, his body an imposing, unyielding wall. "The cost was everything," he admitted, his gaze intense, drilling into her. "It cost me every night of sleep, every moment of focus, and the illusion that I was better off alone." He was breathing hard, the perfectly tailored tuxedo suddenly looking like a cage he was struggling to break free from. "You were right," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, raw murmur. "The fear of being seen was greater than the pain of losing you, and you burned down my fortress in front of the city's elite." "Good," she whispered, tears finally blurring her vision. "Now they don't see the invulnerable CEO. They see the man who is afraid. They see the man who is in love," he corrected, the words a sudden, gut-wrenching confession. The power of the statement was immense, stripping the air from her lungs. "From the moment you fainted on my property, I lost control, and in that loss, I found a terrifying, impossible need for you. I didn't send you away because I was ashamed of you. I sent you away because I was afraid of what I would become with you, a man who couldn't function without the warmth and the chaos you brought into my sterile life." The confession, so raw and unplanned, was the bridge she had been unknowingly waiting for. She took a shaky breath, trying to process the overwhelming truth of his words. "You should have trusted me," she said, the pain in her voice a physical ache. "You should have trusted that my chaos could handle your control." Elijah reached out, his hand finally finding her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear she hadn't known had fallen. The touch was electric, not a jolt of fire, but a profound, grounding connection of two lonely souls finally finding their anchor. "I'm learning," he whispered. "I have no reference point for this, Harper. My life has been a balance sheet, not a poem. But you are the most beautiful, most dangerous variable I have ever encountered. I can't protect you from my world if I keep pushing you back into yours." The lights of the main hall dimmed, signaling the end of the gala. The moment was about to be lost to the mundane necessity of guests departing. Harper pulled his hand away from her face, holding his large, warm hand between both of her small ones. "You can't buy me, Elijah. You can't buy my silence with 6 months of rent, and you can't buy my forgiveness." "I know," he admitted, his voice thick with sincerity. "But I can try to earn it. By living a life that is messy and honest and with you." He looked around the grand lobby, at the remnants of the power players, observing them with avid curiosity. For the first time, he didn't care. "I want you to come home," he said. "Not as a guest, not as a liability, but as the disorder that completes my order. You wanted me to be honest? Here is the truth. My penthouse is a tomb without your basil plant and your chaotic post-it notes. I need the color, Harper. I need your beautiful, maddening chaos." Harper felt her final defenses crumble. The man she loved, the man who was capable of being the cold silicon tyrant, was standing before her, stripped of his armor, offering her not a promise of wealth, but a promise of vulnerability. "What about your reputation?" she challenged, her voice low and tight. "What about the headlines? The CEO of Horizon Tech is dating the local community art teacher. Your board, the press, they will tear us apart." Elijah smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his severe features, making him look younger, more human, and utterly besotted. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile without a hidden agenda. "Let them try," he said, his voice now imbued with a new quiet determination. "I own the building that houses your studio, Harper. I own your chaos. I will protect your world with every asset I possess. Let them look. Let them talk. They will learn a new truth, that my greatest asset isn't a stock price, it's the woman who taught me how to live." He lowered his head, and his lips finally met hers. It was not the tentative, searching kiss of first love. It was a collision of their two worlds. It was the frantic, pent-up release of weeks of forced proximity and brutal emotional restraint. It was messy, demanding, and utterly real. It tasted of the harsh fear they had conquered, and the sweet, terrifying promise of a shared future. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist, anchoring her to him. The onlookers, the crystal chandeliers, the cold marble, it all vanished. There was only the heat of their connection, the undeniable elemental force that had brought her fainting to his doorstep in a storm, and had now brought them back together in the heart of his empire. The next day, Harper returned to the penthouse, but this time she brought her own bags, her own battered easel, and a fresh supply of paint, which she deliberately set near the immaculate marble counter in the kitchen. The tension was still there, but it was a comfortable, exciting tension, the low hum of two lives finally, willingly merging. Elijah was waiting for her, not in a suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and jeans. He looked relaxed yet focused, like a general surveying a new welcome battlefield. "I have performed a risk assessment on the paint," he announced, a teasing flicker in his dark eyes. "I will purchase industrial-grade drop cloths and dedicate a section of the sub-level storage for a ventilated workspace. However, I must forbid the use of neon colors in the main living space." Harper laughed, a bright, joyous sound that echoed through the vast, quiet space, the sound of her soul finally returning home. "Deal, Mr. Brown, but the basil plant stays in the kitchen." He nodded, a faint, genuine smile playing on his lips. "The basil stays. It is a necessary variable." Their life together began not with a perfect resolution, but with a delicate negotiation, a slow dance between his logic and her creativity. He would still work the insane hours that his empire demanded, but now she would leave a mug of her ginger lavender infusion on his desk, a non-negotiable comfort. He, in turn, would learn to appreciate the faint, lingering smell of oil paint, and she would learn the terrifying beauty of the night sky through the telescope. He finally set up on the terrace, where it belonged. A week later, Elijah hosted a board meeting in the penthouse. His assistant had informed Harper that it would be best if she remained in her suite, but she simply ignored the suggestion. She walked into the living area in a simple dress, her hair pinned up loosely, holding a tray of her homemade, slightly messy biscotti. The 6 members of the Horizon Tech board were stiff, serious men, accustomed to the silence and absolute order of their CEO. They saw the penthouse not as a home, but as a power hub, an extension of the boardroom. Harper placed the tray of biscotti on the massive conference table, the warm scent of cinnamon and almond, a radical intrusion into the sterile environment. "Welcome," she said, her smile genuine and disarming. "Elijah is running a few minutes behind schedule. Please help yourselves. They're imperfect but delicious. I'm Harper Miller, the artist who is slowly, thankfully, ruining Mr. Brown's life." The silence was deafening. Then a small, tentative laugh broke out from one of the older board members as he reached for a cookie. Elijah walked in a minute later, his gaze immediately going to Harper. He didn't offer an explanation or an apology to his board. He simply walked to her, placing a possessive hand on the small of her back, an open public claim, and leaned down to whisper in her ear. "You are 15 minutes early, you beautiful menace," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "And you have flour on your cheek." He kissed the spot openly in front of his entire board, before turning to his colleagues with an unwavering calm. "Gentlemen," Elijah announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had everything to lose and had decided to risk it all. "This is Harper. We have an acquisition to discuss and a wedding to plan. Let us begin." He looked at Harper, his eyes full of the unquantifiable love she had taught him to feel. He had stopped trying to control the uncontrollable chaos of life, and in doing so, he had finally found peace. The moment Elijah kissed Harper openly in the lobby, the reclusive, control-obsessed silicon tyrant exposing his heart to the art world, was the true end of his old life. But the beginning of their life together was the real story. Their relationship was not a simple switch from control to chaos. It was a constant, deliberate merging of two opposite forces, a beautiful and sometimes frustrating negotiation. Life in the penthouse became a vibrant, beautiful anomaly. Harper's presence was a continuous, subtle invasion of color and life. She hung one of her abstract, colorful canvases, a tumultuous landscape of pinks and blues, on the vast, empty wall behind the minimalist dining area. Elijah, instead of removing it, had a custom lighting system installed to highlight the texture and depth of the brushstrokes. He drew a hard, analytical line at framed posters, but he permitted any and all original art, no matter how chaotic. Their negotiations were constant and loving. Elijah would find her paintbrushes left soaking in the sleek, German-engineered sink, and his only protest would be a quiet, theatrical sigh and the production of a new, compartmentalized cleaning solution he had designed specifically for oil residue. Harper, in turn, learned to respect the sanctity of his code caves, the private, soundproofed rooms where he performed his deep, uninterrupted work. She would never open the doors, but she would always leave a small cup of her herbal tea just outside, a silent offering of comfort. She was teaching him to value the imperfect. He was teaching her the joy of stability. Their first great test came from the outside world. The media, of course, was relentless. The Silicon Tyrant's raw public display of affection for a community art teacher from a disadvantaged neighborhood was front-page news for weeks. Headlines screamed, "Harper Miller, the woman who crashed Horizon Tech's firewall, and love on the balance sheet. Did Elijah Brown acquire a bride?" Photographers camped outside his tower, hoping for a glimpse of the mystery woman who had tamed the city's most untouchable billionaire. Elijah handled the scrutiny with the same unyielding authority he used in the boardroom, but this time he was defending Harper, not a corporate asset. When a particularly aggressive reporter from a notorious tabloid ambushed them outside a restaurant and asked Elijah if Harper's chaotic background was a distraction to his company and a risk to his shareholders, Elijah didn't flinch. He stopped, turned to face the camera, and released a one-sentence statement that instantly silenced the critics and went viral. "Harper Miller is the most stabilizing, brilliant, and essential force in my life. Her chaos is what allows me to see true order. Any further inquiries regarding my private life will be directed to my personal legal team who, effective immediately, will be filing suit for harassment." It was the ultimate public declaration of protection. He was using his immense power not to hide her, but to shield her, drawing a clear and impenetrable line in the sand. He was telling the world that she was not his weakness. She was his greatest strength. The culmination of Elijah's great gesture, as Harper privately called it, came 3 months after the gala. He had kept his promise. The structural inspection of her old art studio building had been extended indefinitely, with full rent paid in advance. She had been working out of a temporary space he'd arranged, but she missed the comforting familiarity of her own studio. One morning, he took her there, saying there was an update from the inspectors. She walked in and found her small, beloved space transformed. It was renovated, expanded, and perfected. The ancient, clanking heating system was replaced with state-of-the-art climate control. The leaky roof was sealed and fitted with a solar array. The cramped back room had been knocked down and rebuilt into a professional, beautifully lit gallery space, ready to showcase her students' work. Elijah stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his expression carefully neutral as he watched her face, watched her take it all in. "I didn't want charity," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears of overwhelming gratitude and shock. "It is not charity," he said, walking to her, his voice tender and low. "It is an investment. In the community, in your vision, and in the person who taught me that the highest value in life cannot be quantified by a market cap. I acquired the building not to control your work, but to protect your ability to be you, free from the constant, exhausting struggle I saw in your eyes that first day." He pulled a small, engraved plaque from his pocket. It read, "The Harper Miller Community Arts Center, a division of the Horizon Tech Foundation. The foundation gives you complete creative and operational autonomy," he explained, his voice full of pride. "My board is fully supportive. They saw your passion at that board meeting, Harper. They tasted your imperfect biscotti. They saw the value in your chaos." Harper threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, the tears finally falling freely. This was the moment of full surrender, of complete integration. He had not just accepted her world, he had woven it into the fabric of his own, validating her identity and her life's work on the grandest possible scale. He hadn't just given her a gift, he had given her a legacy. The ultimate shift in Elijah's mindset, the final piece of his transformation, came one clear, cold night on the Penthouse terrace. Harper found him there late, not working on a holographic display, but looking up at the sky. The massive, beautiful telescope, once a dusty monument to a failed mathematical exercise, was finally set up and aimed at the heavens. He moved the heavy lens with a fluid, practiced ease that surprised her. "You were right about the stars," he murmured, without taking his eye from the lens. "They are chaotic, infinite, and utterly beautiful. I am learning to appreciate the profound beauty in the unpredictability of light years." He adjusted the eyepiece and stepped aside, gesturing for her to look. "Look, Harper, it's the Andromeda Galaxy. 2.5 million light-years away. 2 trillion stars hurtling through the dark, and we have absolutely no control over any of it." Harper leaned in and looked through the scope. She gasped. She saw a swirling, dizzying light, a cosmic spiral of impossible beauty and scale. It was breathtaking. When she looked up, Elijah was watching her, not the sky. His expression was soft, completely unguarded, and full of a love so deep it felt as infinite as the galaxy she had just seen. "I spent my entire life trying to be the center of my own universe," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Controlling every variable, every orbit. But you showed me that the true center of everything is connection. It's us, navigating the beautiful, terrifying chaos together. I don't want to live without the fear of losing you, Harper, because that fear is what makes me feel alive." He knelt before her, not with a grand theatrical flourish, but with a quiet, deliberate seriousness that was far more powerful. He pulled out a small, velvet-lined box from his pocket. "This is not an acquisition, Harper," he said, his voice steady as he opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant platinum band, deliberately free of massive, ostentatious diamonds. "It is a merger of two fundamentally opposite, but wholly complementary entities. I give you my life, my chaos, and my entire world, and I'm asking for yours in return. Will you marry me?" Harper, overwhelmed by the simplicity and the profound honesty of the moment, didn't hesitate. Tears streamed down her face as she smiled, a smile so bright it could rival the stars above. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Elijah, I will marry you." Their wedding was not the grand society event the world expected. It was a small, quiet affair, held in the newly renovated art studio, amidst the comforting smell of fresh paint and oil pastels. The guests were her students, their families, and a handful of Elijah's most trusted colleagues, the ones who had seen the value in her chaos from the very beginning. Elijah's only demand for the wedding was that Harper's art be everywhere. Her colorful, chaotic canvases hung on every wall, a vibrant testament to the world she had built and the world he had fallen in love with. He had finally found his balance, the clean, minimalist lines of his own life, beautifully framed by the messy, vibrant, and utterly essential color of hers. He never became a completely different man. He remained disciplined, intensely focused, and ruthlessly powerful in the business world, but he learned to leave his need for absolute control at the door of the penthouse. He learned that the only way to truly live was to embrace the terrifying, beautiful disorder of love. He would still spend hours analyzing market data, but now he would do it with one of Harper's charcoal smudges on his cheek, a mark he refused to wipe away. He learned that his greatest strength was not his billion-dollar bank account, but his capacity for the deep, vulnerable connection that Harper had forced him to see in himself. He learned that a life without the constant, thrilling threat of a little paint on the marble was simply not a life worth living. Their life together became a legend in the city. The story of the reclusive billionaire and the chaotic artist was more than just a romance. It was a parable about order and chaos, logic and passion. The Horizon Tech Foundation, under Harper's guidance, became the single largest benefactor of arts education in the country, funding programs that gave a voice to thousands of children who, like Harper, found their strength in creativity. Harper, in turn, never lost her fire. She became a celebrated artist in her own right, her work sought after by galleries and collectors worldwide. But she never left her community studio. She remained grounded in the messy, authentic world that had made her who she was, a world that now served as an anchor for both of them. One evening, years after their wedding, Harper found Elijah on the terrace, staring through the telescope. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his back. "What are you mapping tonight, Mr. Brown?" she asked softly. He turned in her arms, his expression one of complete contentment. "Nothing," he said, kissing her forehead. "I've finally stopped trying to map the universe. It's far more interesting to just watch it unfold." He looked down at her, his dark eyes full of a love that had only deepened with time. "I was a man who lived in a world of black and white, of absolute zeros and ones. I thought that was strength. I thought that was control." He gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch still sending a familiar shiver through her. "But you, Harper Miller, you are a masterpiece of color. You taught me that true strength isn't found in avoiding the mess. It's found in having the courage to embrace it, to mix the colors together and create something new." She smiled, leaning into his touch. "And you, Elijah Brown, are not so black and white yourself. You just needed someone to show you all the shades of gray." He pulled her closer, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. The storm that had brought them together felt like a lifetime ago, but its effects were permanent. It had washed away his sterile, empty world and watered the seeds of a life he never knew he wanted. He had been rescued not from a storm of rain and wind, but from the silent, suffocating drought of his own existence. And she, the artist who had fainted in his world of cold marble, had found her home in the unexpected, unwavering warmth of his heart. Together, they had built their own universe, a perfect, beautiful balance of structure and chaos, a love story written in the stars and painted in the brightest colors imaginable. Some loves don't just happen to us, they rebuild us from the ground up. They find the cracks in our walls and fill them with light. If this story of chaos and control reminded you of a love that changed everything, tell us about it in the comments. And subscribe so you never miss a story, because the greatest love stories never truly end. They just become a part of who we are.